How's it going, everybody? Welcome here to week 5. We are just about done here with this class. Congratulations! And in fact, this is kind of like the last major, um, big chunk of content. We've sort of gotten up to the 21st century. Next week, we'll sort of look at trends that are ongoing, but it's really hard, as we'll talk about next week, to really, historically zoom out on the present. But hopefully, after this week, you'll kind of see, and hopefully after this class, I mean, the whole point is to kind of see how the present has been constructed by the past, shaped by the past, help to look at current events or the world around us with a little more focus, a little bit better understanding of where people are, who they are, where they came from, some of the historical legacies that are still um, shaping the present. So, with that said, I mean, you know, again, the lesson I think 11 here, Cold War, counterculture, sort of the post 20th century, sort of the second half of the 20th century. Talked about the conflicts and challenges at the beginning, massive, large scale world wars sort of decline, and they haven't really come back since then, thankfully. So maybe we have learned our lesson a little bit on that. But this sort of Cold War, that didn't mean conflicts disappeared. Sort of this Cold War, a lot of these proxy wars, Korea, and then we sort of talked about it, the Korea War. That's a really good example of something shaping the present. This North-South Korea comes right after these divisions and different political, cultural alignments have maintained this distinction in North and South Korea. Talked about decolonization, right? After World War II, a lot of these nations that were thought about self-determination between the interwar period achieved that, became independent. India, China, Japan. We talked about Africa, all these sort of different areas. Looked at the Middle East a little bit, and then kind of the decline of the Cold War, the Vietnam sort of middle period where there's sort of this thawing, and then the ultimate end of the Cold War, 80s, early 90s, particularly with the fall of the Berlin Wall was very demarcated that. But then the other side of this coin, there were a lot of people who saw the world around them in this sort of atomic standoff, two worlds, bipolar world, and said, "I don't want any of this." Right? That we want a third way or some other to challenge these sort of traditions, hegemonic ideas, and that's where this idea of counterculture comes up. And again, this can be kind of traced back to the Enlightenment and to these ideas of equality and liberty and challenging the order, the old monarchical order, and then or abolition, kind of all these sort of world historical issues that have been moving around come to surface in these rights movements, civil rights in America, African American, but you can expel that out to sort of apartheid in South Africa. Civil rights in general, the idea of discrimination has been challenged based on race or culture. Women's rights, again, we've sort of been tracing that anyway. A lot of people look at Wollstonecraft's 1792 Vindication of the Rights of Women is sort of the first idea of equality for women, and then we trace that up with women's suffrage and voting, and then ultimately advocating for equality with women's rights, civil rights, LGBTQ rights, indigenous rights, environmental rights, animal rights, all these things that were kind of came out of the 60s, 70s, where people were kind of advocating for these new ways, which again are still being worked out today. None of those have been solved, but at least those conversations are happening and ongoing, and those will forever change. I mean, they'll be sort of pushed back here and there on different sides of those, but you can't just now. I mean, no one can say we're going to go back to slavery, right? Hopefully, I mean, if we do, well, I think we have bigger issues than World History 152. Yeah, and then some of the videos, I gave a video on Rachel Carson. I think she's very important, very prominent figure in the early environmental rights world. The summer of '67, which was sort of this youth movement out of it, and then a interview with Trask, Nani K. Trask, who's very prominent voice of Hawaiian sovereignty movement, indigenous rights movement in general. And that discussion, I think she does a really good job of tying in. Sometimes it's called intersectionality of these different rights movements and how it played out in Hawaii. And she was very much a voice of that there. Um, yeah, I think so. Got some readings about African um, Nui Wantiwango, sort of a Kenyan scholar that talks about decolonization in Kenya. And then, sort of at the end, sort of some other sort of trends post World War II, trans space race. This idea of getting into space, which obviously today is we got the James Webb Telescope and all sorts of things. Um, yeah, entertainment, internet things, all of those, the atomic debate in a nuclear world that we live in. So, so that's and then quiz 11 goes with quiz 3, and hopefully you've seen that. There's since we've covered so much in like the sort of like lessons 8 or sorry 9, 10, and 11. No writing on this one. Just try to get familiar with the terms. There's a lot of terms, so that's just look at the review guide and check on that. And then globalization, kind of this is sort of post Cold War kind of fruition of a lot of these. Um, um, yeah, fruition of a lot of what we talked about. And I think this is probably people can look around and kind of see the world that we live. There's sort of this globalized. People are familiar with the world around them. Now we can zoom across the world if we want to. I could call somebody up in Australia, connect with them in Rome, maybe have somebody else in Mexico. I mean, we live in this international world. So where this, and particularly after the Cold War, there was this idea of globalization. These conglomerates of nations that would work together sort of cooperatively. Some by regions like the EU, European Union, or the African Union, or trade pacts, ASEAN, and then various NAFTA. Sometimes these NGOs became very popular, non-governmental organizations that helped mitigate issues there. So, we've sort of this idea of globalization was really big. That kind of crumbled a little bit with 9/11 and this sort of war on terror, which was a larger conflicts, and it took place in Afghanistan and Iraq, but it was a very kind of global issue that was being addressed. People rejecting, particularly from sort of that was Osama bin Laden's sort of thing and people who followed him, Al Qaeda, of rejecting this sort of cultural assimilation. That there is a distinct culture. There isn't this hegemonic world of the West or America. There's other people that believe other things, and whether you agree with that or not, that was the argument being made. And then and then that kind of brings us up. And then 2008 was another global financial crisis, similar to the Great Depression, sort of sparked in America, but reverberated out. And one of the background checks of that was people questioning this globalization. Should we be so intertwined? Should we go on our own? And what you see with you can see in modern trends, this what I call retraction of globalization, which we talked about there. Yeah. And that kind of gets us to discussion post 4. Please read over those points. What I want you to do is just take a look, think about, this is why I kind of switched this up. So we're only doing the quiz this week and the discussion post next week. I thought maybe space those out a little bit, because I do want you to kind of think about a contemporary issue, something you're sort of concerned with. But what I want you to do is, now that we have the skills to do it, is sort of trace that back as far as we can. Things from the past are shaped by things by the present are shaped by the past. So how can we see these? I gave an example of Afghanistan war, which just did it in 2021. But I traced that back to sort of this 9/11 issue. But then I went back to the history of Afghanistan itself, what it came from, and traced it back to 1500, right, and back to the Mughal Empire. So take an issue, and you can do this with pretty much any issue. Just try to kind of think about it more historically. Zoom out a little bit. I did say, I know this might cause a little bit of or not cause, but maybe require a little bit of research. If you want to use some AI stuff to kind of get an idea of that, feel free. But just mark it at the bottom. I use and explain what you used it for, maybe to generate ideas. But I do, within that, I want you to find at least one primary source to quote from whatever you're looking at, and cite it so I can take a look at it. And again, put these in your own words. Use course materials to, don't just rely on the AI. Take the AI and put it in with what you've learned. Kind of mesh those together. The AI and the HI, the human intelligence. So I think that's it. The next week's last week. We'll have that discussion post. So you can kind of get started on now. or the end of the week or the weekend. That's due Tuesday. It's a little bit longer, 500 words, and then just the final on Friday and Saturday, and that's it. I'll get your grades back to you hopefully at Sunday or Monday, and then you're off. Then you're free for the rest of the week of summer until school starts again. But all right, take it easy.